Hi, I'm Katrina Mikett. I'm co-curator for the show Armed Disposal at Victory Mo Gallery in New York City, and I'm joined by one of the 8 artists, Amy Khoshbin. Hi, Amy. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, what's up?
If you could do us the favor of telling us a little bit about where you're from, what's your art background, and what type of art you make, that would be great.
Cool. So I'm a Brooklyn-based artist. I've been in Brooklyn for a long while, and my heritage is Iranian American, and the reason why I mention that is because it comes up in the work that I made for the show. I work in a lot of different media. I'm a conceptual artist. I work in social practice, performance, collage, video, sculpture, music, politics, a lot of different fields. And for this show, I made a collage called Big Shot that was all about gun control and regulation internationally.
I'm glad you brought up the piece of artwork you made along with your background in art and politics, because that was one of the impetuses to bring you into the show, to bring that element of gun consumerism as it influences politics. Can you please explain a little bit more about your involvement in politics as an artist?
Yes. So for me, it's always been an involvement because of my identity and the way I identify as Iranian American, I identify as queer. And so because of that, I've often thought about this notion of othering and otherness, and how do we change these systems of xenophobia so that they are inclusive, and how do we actually get in and infiltrate these systems in a real way to kind of change them from the ground up. And so I have always made work that's involved imagery from like Persian miniatures, which is included in the collage, and thinking about using other sort of artists that have inspired me, science fiction themes. Sun Ra is another inspiration, thinking about using sort of sociocultural issues of today couched in a future aesthetic to talk about politics and to talk about social change. And in that case of Sun Ra, it was Black liberation, which we're coming back around to again. And I think, that had always been part of my practice. And then when Trump was elected in 2017, I did a whole project called Word on the Street, which was literally protest banner making, and responding to the political environment with little bite-sized pieces of language written by female-identified writers, partnered with female-identified artists, creating imagery sort of a la Russian constructivism and so many other movements that are around political messaging. And that kind of got me more involved back into my activist roots of direct action organizing. And it kind of carried through, leading me to kind of question what our role is as artists in the realm of electoral politics. And so I was just having a conversation actually with you about this notion and idea that I've had for years now of running for city council as an artist, to bring in creative practice to the realm of electoral politics, to think about ways we can change the system from the inside out and use our skills, no matter what they are, to engage I used to say progressive, and now I'm like radical. I feel like progressive isn't even like leftist enough for what I want anymore. But radical social change, infiltrating these sort of hierarchical systems from the ground up. So that's why I'm thinking local politics in this case. But yeah, I think, and I was just speaking also about, I'm a Pratt Institute fellow in civic engagement for the fall, which is very exciting. It's a position that Sean Leonardo started. And so there's going to be a real element of pedagogy and social practice that I also consider part of my work as an artist, as well as an activist too, because I think political education, and again, using our skills as artists, and being able to create spectacle and being able to create like beautiful optics around things that, often people don't want to pay attention to, or may seem very procedural or hard to understand. I think now we're seeing, especially with all of the defund the police abolition, prison abolition, Black liberation movement that's happening now, that people are willing to open their ears and their eyes to the ways that city council and local government participate in these systems of oppression, as well as how we can use our agency to create a liberated future in this moment. And so I think that's something that we do as artists often, is envision possible futures, possible other worlds, and world build. And now we're seeing an opportunity to really build potentially a new world. And so using that creative practice and strategy is a very, very powerful thing in this moment. And so so it's all kind of merging for me right now. I'm doing a lot of direct action organizing. I made this collage. I make collages. I'm embarking on a whole media campaign around what's going to be happening in the city council race, but from the perspective of fine art and art making, so that it can bridge that gap, because there's a lot of power in the art world. There's a lot of money in the art world, as we know, and there's a lot of really like hierarchical, fucked up institutions in the art world, very neoliberal kind of, that are now open to having a dialogue about how there's oppression, having a dialogue about how there's misogyny and racism, and and I think continuing to push through our creative practice as makers is really potent. So yeah, that was a really long answer, sorry.
I think that's the great intro to your artwork right now. Pedagogy in politics, art as a form to bring awareness to it. So I'm just going to share the screen now. So I just want to bring up a very important fact that you raised in your artist statement about this artwork.
Oh yeah.
That's a really great context for it. So the gun industry in the United States is $51 billion, and we have an average of 36,000 deaths per year. If you compare that to Australia, who bans some major assault rifles after a mass shooting in 1996, they have about 200 deaths a year. And then in Japan, which is one of the countries with the strictest gun laws in the world since the 1600s, they have an average of 10 a year. So I would love to know why you decided to compare these three different countries when speaking about gun violence issues.
So I chose these three because America is the worst in terms of gun violence, gun control, and the amount of money that goes into the gun industry. The amount of money is the highest. And we have the highest amount of deaths. So that on the one extreme was, it had to be represented. And on the other end of the spectrum, I had wanted to represent Japan because it basically is one of the countries with the least amount of deaths. And what's interesting is, because the gun regulation has been so strict and it's been so odd, like it's not part of the socio-cultural fabric of Japan to own a gun as a civilian. Because of that, we're talking about 10 gun deaths a year. You know what I mean? That's nothing. That's like, what is that, a day in the US? You know what I mean? So it's sort of like, I definitely wanted to have those two. The reason why I included Australia is because Australia now has one of the lowest gun deaths as well in the world. And it's a westernized, quote unquote, nation. But it has that because in 96, they took a concerted effort after a mass shooting to really go in and change those gun laws. And so I wanted to include that one because to me, I'm like, that shows the potentiality of lowering the amount of deaths and lowering the issues that we see stemming from gun violence in our country, literally at the policy level. Like if we actually took action after some of, Orlando, Sandy Hook, Columbine, all of these things that have happened and on 1,000, we would be in a much different place in terms of gun deaths per year. And so the reason for selecting these is to really show visually how kind of gross the tie between capital, lawmakers, and death is in this country. And that extends beyond just gun regulation. That also relates to the military industrial complex kind of being the main export of the US at this point. Militarism, war, death, and violence. And so, we don't, folks don't necessarily consciously think about it, but it is. I mean, it's a real issue in terms of lawmakers, and the heads of this collage are the lawmakers who have received the most funding from gun rights interests and put the most energy behind deregulating gun laws. So that's where the heads of the monster are, these folks that are really, and you can see what the demographic is. Like, they basically look like Trumpers. You know what I mean? They look like, Make America Great Again. They're all white, mostly male. And, these are the folks that are at the helm in terms of, if they, and it's gross because it has to do with greed. It's greed above human life.
Or could you explain who some of the people are?
This is Martha McSally, John Cornyn, Steve Scalise, Don Young, Ron Johnson, John Thune, Mitch McConnell, Ken Calvert. So these are folks who, like, top 20 recipients of funds from gun rights interests among members of Congress. And then I also included the founders of the NRA, so William Condon Church and George Wood Wingate in that group, because they were kind of the first gun lobbyists to put this kind of idea of, and it started a few months after the Civil War began. So there is this time, and it's not a coincidence that these people are white. And it's interesting, actually, because it's a conversation that I've had with a couple friends of mine who were saying, in this moment of the movement for Black liberation and Black Lives Matter that's happening right now, how does that relate to gun control and, what we're seeing with the police? And in certain, in England, the police don't have weapons. Why is this not a part of the dialogue? And it's interesting. I was reading some articles about it, and there's this strange thing, because a lot of gun control lobbyists, though I am pro gun control, obviously, are working with the police to do background checks. Like, that is one of the regulations that's often included in gun control lobbying. And so it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition with what's happening with Black Lives Matter, because a lot of the gun control organizations are mainly white folks. So so a lot of the energy around guns on all sides of the equation are, it's led by white people, and so it's interesting in thinking about that in the current moment.